The investment in Kaveri program, when compared with other major engine manufacturers that you mentioned, has been less than a percentage.
Who is to blame and what can we do now?
Oh, let's skip the blame part for the experts on the social media. Leave it to them.
I had asked the External Affairs Minister that why do we still not have like a well-formulated national security strategy, and the answer that he gave me was quite strange. And he said that if we have one, but if he were to tell me that, he will have to kill me.
The saffron or the French engine manufacturers have played a significant role in helping us get to the place where we are.
There was this tendency, right? I mean, there's this very sweeping tendency to just call anybody an import Bahadur that wants to sort of fill in the gap.
We need to focus not just on acquisition, we need to focus on design, development, testing, integrating, then improving on the feedback provided. And after all that is done, our own ability to manufacture at scale. So our security strategy should tell us that what is China? A friend, a competitor, or we need to go into a shooting war with them.
The heated debate surrounding India's procurement challenges, reliance on imports, and indigenous production continues. This discourse has gained renewed attention following China's recent unveiling of its sixth-generation fighters, a stark contrast to India's ongoing struggle to develop engines for its fourth-gen aircraft. My previous conversation on the worldview got significant engagement across platforms like the YouTube and X, and we identified several notable patterns in the feedback received. First is that the episode sparked considerable excitement among the Chinese commentators. We appreciate this interest, regardless of where in the world it was coming from. And second, it is concerning that several viewers framed the debate in a binary, a zero-sum game, trivializing the gravity of the strategic discourse. Advocates for short-term imports were unfairly labeled as corrupt, alleging they received kickbacks, or were dismissively called import Bahadurs. Right from the defense secretary to the air chief to the fighter pilots, nobody was spared. Such binaries don't help. It's high time we discuss the issue based on its merits and with a serious consideration to taxpayers' money. Because yes, it's you and I who pay for the machines, and it's you and I that are the final arbiters. And for that, we need a more informed debate, not name-calling, not gaslighting, and not trivializing. Next, we observed that a significant source of confusion regarding India's defense approach stems from the lack of a clearly articulated, broadly defined security strategy, which is not the same as disclosing India's national security secrets. The absence of such a framework has contributed to decades of delays, during which our adversaries have consistently outpaced us, and especially China. Finally, there also continues a latent sexism in our public discourse in general and in the strategic community in particular, which is disappointing to say the least. It tells a sordid tale of poorly disguised misogyny and patriarchal attitudes that show defense and defense tech discussions are still a male bastion. Despite the above, and before I open the discussion, it is heartening to note that genuine interest and insightful feedback from an overwhelming number of viewers was also received. Their willingness to learn about development of the engines and Tejas is the subject of today's Worldview with Swasti, which I cannot do without the fighter pilot himself. Joining me today once again is our own real-life Tom Cruise, Group Captain Ajay Ahlawat, with extensive experience of flying both Russian and Western jets, commanding an air squadron, and being a flying instructor. His expert's views will help us unravel two immediate issues, the Kaveri engine and the LCA Mark 1. Ajay, you are no stranger to the Worldview with Swasti, and by now you have a fan following of your own. So very happy to have you here.
Well, thank you for bringing me here again.
Yeah, so like I said, that we have to now start discussing the most fundamental of everything, which is that the engine. And by engine, I mean the Kaveri engine. Now, it's very interesting that when my father was writing his PhD on rocket propellants, which is mid-80s, late 80s, that was the time when, when we speak to him, he says that was the time when they as youngsters, right, used to be very excited about the proposition of India finally kind of joining the big league by developing their own engine and by developing the first aircraft. But then 40 years down the line, we are still struggling with developing an 80 kilonewton thrust engine, which is Kaveri. And right now, as things are, we still are not able to achieve the objective set out for Kaveri unless we zero in on either of the three main partners. We could go with the US, with the GE, the General Electric. We could go with Safran, which is French, or we could go with Rolls-Royce, which is UK. Why do you think that it has taken 40 years and we are still here? Who is to blame and what can we do now?
Oh, let's skip the blame part for the experts on the social media. Leave it to them.
Okay.
Let me connect this episode of ours with the past, the last episode.
Yeah.
In that, we discussed the status of fighter numbers in our Air Force. We also looked at what Chinese are building. And in the entire discussion, we made a fleeting mention of Kaveri.
Yeah.
Okay, any aircraft would require propulsion. And for a fighter aircraft, that jet engine is the heart of the aircraft.
Right.
So it is one of the most significant items if you look at the development of indigenous program. Kaveri and LCA, it came to be known as Tejas much later in 2002.
Right.
But initially it was called as LCA light combat aircraft. They were both born more or less at the same time.
Early 80s, if I'm
Yeah,
not wrong.
in 1983, the government decided that we need to build our own fighter. In 84, and this task was given to DRDO. In 84, DRDO created an organization called ADA, we call it ADA, Aeronautical Development Agency. And ADA was entrusted with the task of developing this fighter. 85, the air staff gave its requirement, and 86 is when the work for Kaveri engine started.
Okay.
As per the initial requirement, it was supposed to give about 50 kilonewton of thrust in dry and 70-75 in afterburning regime. As you rightly mentioned, it has been a while. It has taken us 40 odd years, and that engine is still not fit to be used in a fighter. So, if you look at it in isolation, this seems like a failure.
Right.
However, we must keep in mind that when we consider returns to investment,
Yeah.
this has been a massive success.
Okay.
The investment in Kaveri program, when compared with other major engine manufacturers that you mentioned, has been less than a percentage.
Oh, I see. So that's a very important point because, and also, I think we should spend some time in making the viewers understand that it's very easy to say that Kaveri has not reached where it was supposed to reach, but at the same time, there are only three countries in the world, three or four countries in the world that actually champion the engine technology: US, Russia, France, and UK. And now that India is trying to join that league, not even Israel perhaps has its own engine technology. So please also tell us about that because there is this tendency of looking at Kaveri in terms of a failure, in terms of this blame game. But as you said, that it is also a success when you sort of change the parameters and when you want to also understand that bit. Please
So
tell me.
the Kaveri engine per se
Yeah.
is a good product. The Kaveri project failed to achieve the objective that was set out for it. But once again, as I mentioned, the amount of investment that we have done is a fraction of what the major engine manufacturers do. And what we have achieved right now at this stage, the engine is cleared to be used in aerial vehicle, and
Right.
there are plans to use Kaveri dry version in the Ghatak UCAV
Yeah.
that the DRDO is building.
Yeah.
So amongst hits and misses, there has been success as well as some failures.
Right. Okay. And then, so right now where we stand is that even if we want to develop the Kaveri engines from where it is right now and for a fighter aircraft, so there is a bit of a distinction that you have to remember right now, is that whatever we have indigenously developed for Kaveri is something that we are going to be using for our drones in popular, parlance, which I will come to later because I'm going to be discussing a bit on that as well. But for making it deployable in a fighter aircraft, we still are far from there, and for that we will need either of the three, like either the American General Electrics or the French Safran or the British. Now, I think I'm definitely going to ask you which of the three seems to be most logical or closer, to us. But definitely here, France emerges as one of the key players because of the reliability factor. Because most of these things are also then got to do with how the geopolitics is evolving, etc. But please tell me also technically, where do you think which contender is the closest?
So there are two parts to the question. One is where have we reached vis-a-vis Kaveri? So the domestic industry has realized that we could go only so far without, getting some foreign partners on board.
Okay.
In a seminar last week, the chief scientist, Dr. Kamath, has gone on record stating that code
DRDO,
development,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
code development seems to be the only option if we need to make significant progress from here onwards. There are a couple of candidates for it. The final call will be made by the government.
Right.
But when it comes to French assistance, French have been associated with Kaveri since the early 2000 when SNECMA was involved. Now, saffron, in fact, Kaveri's core is
M88.
M88 core.
Yeah.
So they have been involved. The engine, in terms of engine development, French have been involved for a very long time.
So you mean to say that then is it correct to then say that the basis on which we have been able to develop the Kaveri engine so far is actually based on the M88 engine design by Safran?
No, see, that'll be taking it too far.
Okay.
What I'm saying is the saffron or the French engine manufacturers have played a significant role
Okay.
in helping us get to the place where we are.
Right.
And they seem like a good contender.
So, and even now that we are talking about co-development, and a lot of times when we are talking about co-development, because I understand we all sort of use it a lot as as a buzzword that we have to look at co-development, co-production, etc., etc. In most of the new age defense industrial roadmaps that India has signed, whether it's with the French or with the Americans, we have always focused on co-development and co-production. But then there comes a sticky point, which is that what about transfer of technology? Somehow we are always sold to the idea that a foreign collaborator is a good collaborator, is a good partner if they are willing to give us the technology. I think this is a very, very confused part of this discourse, and nobody better than a fighter pilot himself to sort of break it down.
No, not really. The one who flies need not necessarily know how it is bought. For a pilot, the thing that really matters how she flies.
Okay.
The pilot is least interested in where it was bought. Anyways, coming back to the question, as you rightly mentioned, this TOT aspect is not very clearly understood. When we talk about percentages,
Yeah.
that so and so percentage of technology has been transferred, this percentage is calculated vis-a-vis the agreement that is signed or the contract that is signed.
Yeah.
Take, for example, the Su-30 that we build at Nasik. So there are 12 more on order. The one of the line at Nashik has been initiated. We will call it about 60-70% indigenous.
That's what the report says. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
but actually all the stuff comes from Russia. There is no transfer of IP per se. We don't manufacture the AL-31 engine ourselves.
So if I understand that correctly, so the 12 Sukhoi Mk-30Is order that has been recently given to HAL has been touted as a victory, or has been touted as an achievement, let's say not a victory, but as an achievement of Make in India, according to the DAP 2020 reforms. But when you kind of break that down, is it justified to then say that it is more of assemble in India than really make in India? Because as far as the IP is concerned, as far as the other crucial components are concerned, they're all coming from Russia, but we assemble it here.
No, that's correct. See, they come in the form called CKD, completely knocked down kits,
Yes,
and they're
knockdown
assembled
kits.
here.
Okay.
We don't make the engine, we don't make the avionics, we don't make the ejection seat, we don't make any of the hydraulic pumps, etc., and all that.
Okay.
They come packed, we unwrap them and assemble them.
But then we also have a perception that Russia has been closest to giving us transfer of technology, especially in the domain of aircrafts and avionics. How is it a qualifiable statement then to make?
So when they call transfer of technology, they are willing to transfer the drawings, the papers.
Okay.
But end of the day, you should have the capacity or capability to absorb that technology. Like, let me reference this with Russia-China cooperation.
Okay.
Chinese have been trying to develop their W series of engine based on AL-31 series of Russian engines.
Right.
They get all the assistance, including Russian engineers, but they are still not there. So it's one thing to hand over the material or documentation. Another thing is your own capacity or capability to absorb that transfer of technology.
So I'm glad you made that point, because one of the key objectives of the DAP, which is short for Defense Acquisition Procedure, and these have been constantly getting reformed under the Modi government, especially. And earlier there was a DAP 2016, and then they came up with a revised version of it, DAP 2020. And chances are we will probably have a DAP 2025, because major reforms are expected. So ideally, the DAP 2020 remains to be the gold standard when it comes to procurement, and it has different categories through which we can try and increase that indigenized content, right? Which is usually abbreviated to IC. What, in your views, can we really do? Because the way and the level at which we are standing, I think all of this, and especially when you see that the Chinese have been able to do this, and if we look at this entire discourse in terms of how the power differential has been changing with respect to our arch rivals, we kind of realize that we have not really been able to add value to our own defense industry. What do you think can we do better to really do justice to what the DAP 2020 aims to have, or the DAP 2025 might aim to have?
Okay, in my limited opinion, we focus too much on the A part, that is the acquisition.
Okay.
And we compare ourselves with Chinese. In terms to be truly indigenous, in trying to be Atmanirbhar, the word that seems to go around a lot, we need to focus not just on acquisition, we need to focus on design,
Okay.
development, testing, integrating, then improving on the feedback provided. And after
Right.
all that is done, our own ability to manufacture at scale. So unless we fix all of these, our efforts in trying to be Atmanirbhar or self-reliant or the indigenous powerhouse will fail, because we focus only on one aspect, that is acquisition. Like, how do we acquire? We
Right.
buy it local or we buy it foreign, but we ignore the other aspects, and that
Okay.
is where we're failing.
So yes, I mean, one of the key takeaways also from different kind of internal assessments, whenever the MOD and the various branches come together with other think tanks, etc. One of the things that we do keep referring to is that we have to also simplify it, and we have to focus on other aspects and not, as you said, on one part. But then, if I ask you now to connect that to the Tejas MK-1, right? Because that is basically India's dream first
Yeah.
fighter. Help us understand. I mean, because there was a lot of interest, right, from
Yeah.
the viewers about the Tejas MK-1, etc. They said that we should not go for Rafales, we should only focus on Tejas Mark 1 and the Tejas Mark 2 and then the arm cars, etc., etc. And there seemed to be this bit of a confusion that anybody that says that we should go for Rafales in the short term is actually against indigenous production. So could you just shed some light on that?
Well, Tejas is one subject which is very close to my heart. So you'll have to give a little bit of latitude. There are three questions there.
Okay.
Let me, in brief, throughout the Tejas story.
Yeah.
84, we conceived the idea.
Yeah.
2001, first flight. Okay, 16 years delay. Much of it was attributed to US sanctions after we tested nuclear devices in Pokhran in
Right.
88.
Yeah.
Fine. From 2001 to the induction of first squadron, 2015, it took 15 years.
Okay.
Whereas there was a written contract to supply 40 aircraft by 2013.
Yeah.
There is a delay. Okay, this delay was attributed to a natural progression. When you try and make something of your own, it takes time.
Right.
In this seminar last week, the current air chief has gone on record once again to say, I haven't received those 40.
Yes.
Now the delay is being attributed to GE engines, the delay in supplies. Now imagine if you go to war tomorrow or next month, then all these reasons will be useless actually. We need a ready deployable air force today.
Yes.
If the domestic industry can provide them when required, then they should naturally be the first choice. But if they can't and there is likely to be a delay, then we need to have some equipment at our disposal that we can use in case of a conflict.
Right.
When I say equip the Air Force till the time Mark 1A numbers fill in or Mark 2 comes in or AMCA comes in, it does not mean I am recommending imports. I am recommending a capacity for the Air Force to respond to the national security challenges. See, let me put it simply. Tejas is like my kid. My kid is not doing well at school. It has taken more than required to go through class 10th or 12th and all that.
Yeah.
I don't say, okay, to hell with your kid, let me get the neighbor's kid. That kid is handsome, doing well at school, good in sports as well. No, I will still need to fix my own kid.
Yeah.
The Tejas needed to be fixed and Tejas has to be fixed.
Right.
So what do? You
Yeah.
either change school, You either change the tutors, or
Yeah.
you provide additional tuitions,
Yeah.
or you relook at the whole academic curriculum.
Right.
So fixing Tejas and making sure Tejas program delivers what the Indian Armed Forces require will
Yeah.
take time.
Okay.
The suggestion to import certain numbers of fighters in the interim is only to make sure there is no hollowing out of our Air Force.
Right.
We mentioned last time,
Yes.
our fighter squadrons are the lowest,
Yes.
at the lowest ebb since independence.
Yes.
At
So
this,
time is a vector. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 No, no, please go ahead. Yes.
no,
Yeah.
frankly speaking, at this time, the deterrence capacity of our Air Force is very low. And you know, deterrence is a three-leg table actually. It
Yeah.
needs capability, it needs political will, and it needs communication of that same capability. That okay, fine. Political will can change overnight. Capability will take time to build.
True.
And to make sure we communicate this to the enemy per se, there has to be clearly cogent, coherent, well laid out national security strategy as well. So we need all those things.
The national security strategy. Yes. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. Of course, we are going to come back to that as well. But I just want to, because, there was this, I'm sure you must have seen, because, of course, out of the thousands and thousands of views that the video got, also the thousands and thousands of engagement that we got separately on X, etc., there was this tendency, right? I mean, there's this very sweeping tendency to just call anybody an import Bahadur that wants to sort of fill in the gap because time is a vector and we have certain security challenges. But that makes me, go to this particular thing. Let's, for example, let's for a second, let's buy the argument made by these many respected armchair intellectuals, and let's say no to imports. And I want to, do this little scenario building with you here. Is that let's try to analyze these different scenarios that emerge if we were to say no to imports completely, right? So let's say we take a call and say no to imports. What happens then? Keeping in mind the fact that India has the same kind of security challenges, it has a Pakistan and a China, and a Pakistan backed by China. It also has this vast maritime domain and a very unstable global order. And now we say no to imports. What happens? The first scenario that comes to my mind, Ajay, is that either we enter into a kind of a hard security alliance with a partner that can come to our rescue if there was an armed attack against us. I think, keeping in mind India's strategic autonomy, I don't really see that happening. So that first scenario is something that we are not prepared to do. I don't think India should be compromising on its strategic autonomy by entering into any kind of an alliance with like a NATO or a Japan-US security treaty and so on and so forth. India has to stand on its own feet, the first thing. Let's discuss the second scenario, and that's where I probably want your views, which is that if there is one key takeaway from the Russia-Ukraine war, it has been about drones. So one could argue that if the procurement and if the tech complications are taking 20 years, 30 years, then why not just put that on a hold for a while, or let's just take its own pace and meanwhile double down on drones? Where are we on drones?
Okay, let me reel back a little bit. In a democracy, the citizen remains the final arbiter of how the money ought to be spent.
Sure.
And the citizen speaks through the elected government.
Yes.
Now, there is all this debate going on, the money is limited. So either we spend it on import or we spend it on domestic capacity.
Right.
As you mentioned, should the government decide, okay, we'll run this risk, next 10 years, no import. All this time, energy, national treasure will be spent in building domestic capacity. And in these 10 years or 15 years, whatever time it takes, we'll use other tools in our CNP basket to tackle crisis. No?
CNP is Comprehensive National Power
Yeah.
Basket.
So
Yeah.
one option is through diplomacy
Yeah.
or through alliances, or you could say we will hold off the potential aggressor through other friendly nations, or we'll asking them to intervene on our behalf
Right.
while the domestic industries continue to build.
Right.
That is one option, and it runs its own risk because you are not importing an equipment, but you are actually importing your national security by relying on them.
Yeah.
The other aspect is, and which is a very interesting aspect, which will probably need an entire show of its own. Uh, Between World War I and II,
Yeah.
French spent a lot of money and built a Maginot Line.
Yes.
It was called impregnable. They spent a lot of money for that time, and they said Germans can't run through these lines. There is no way Germans can't run through this line.
And they did.
And Germans exactly did.
The Germans did, yes.
So right now we are looking at building 5th generation fighters or 6th generation fighters, manned fighters.
Yeah.
And by the time they come to fruition, say 20 years later,
Yeah.
they might turn out to be the Maginot Line. because the way or the rate at which AI is developing
Yeah.
and the recent war in Ukraine Russia has shown us that unmanned systems are playing greater and greater role.
Yeah.
So that is one vector the government could take, that we would invest time and treasure in the next generation equipment which could be utilized in the next or future war. So that is one option. We could in fact refocus all our attempt towards unmanned and autonomous system. That could be a possibility, but again, this decision has to be taken at a very, very high level.
No, why I also say this is because while there has been this 3 year long war of grinding attrition on, and one has, I mean, one of the key takeaways that, of course, I have also given in my assessments to the Indian Air Force generally is that the future battlefields, and this is no mystery actually, the future battlefields are going to be transparent. So, on the one hand, while we will need things like the tanks and the other ammunition and everything of that category, we will also require the unmanned vehicles, and not just in the air but also in the water, right? But Ajay, tell me a little bit about how, because when it comes to drones, right? Again, we touch on a raw nerve. Kahin dukti rag hai hamari drones pe, because we have tried to develop surveillance drones. If you look, the most obvious example that comes to mind is the Tapas and Rustam variety, and the other is Ghatak, which has been the combat variety. And if I'm not wrong, then the Kaveri engine, because that you mentioned in one part of in the earlier section of our discussion, is that the Kaveri engine, the way it stands today, although it is undeployable for an aircraft, but it is okay to be deployed in a Ghatak, the drone. But then please help us understand again. How is that also faring when we compare it to the drone programs in Pakistan or China? Because ultimately these are relative things. And then why have we spent so much money in getting these MQ-29 Reaper drones from the US? It's like that's another reason why this import gets such a bad label.
So again, a whole bunch of questions there.
Yes.
I'll quickly run through them.
Yeah.
In terms of domestic effort, the Rustam, the Tapas, they have not achieved the specification that they were expected to achieve. Then there is Ghatak, which will be powered by dry Kaveri.
Yeah.
There is another one which did the engine run a couple of days ago, is called CATS, Combat Air Training System. It's something like Loyal Wingman. It'll be unmanned, which can be teamed up with the manned fighters, or a whole bunch of them can be autonomous and unmanned themselves. So again, a story of hits and misses. There is hardly anything that is deployable right now. Therefore, we go for imports, and we import a lot of drones from Israel.
But a couple of them have not been working well, right? The Hermes, if you go by what has been happening in the last 2-3 times.
So Hermes 900 was imported by the Adani Group. They
Okay.
renamed it as Drishti, and they supplied it to Navy. There was a major accident a couple of days ago, and there have been a couple of failures before. So that brings us to another point when we say, in trying to improve domestic capacity, let's bring in the private
Private
sector.
players, yeah.
So private players or private sector is no panacea that we've seen.
Yeah.
Equipment made by DRDO fails, we blame them. Likewise, the equipment created, assembled, or kind of imported by private sector has failed as well.
Yeah.
So those problems will remain unless we reach a level where we can produce at scale high quality equipment. We will have to face these challenges.
But then, Ajay, we will also have to completely change our defense philosophy, right? I mean, if we are a country where we take 2-3 decades to sort of go into these procurement channels, we also have multiple stakeholders. There is also, stories of having rampant corruption, different kind of, vested interest. And if you want to change that to a fast acquisition of drones as keeping in pace with technology, that also calls for a different kind of a paradigm shift. I mean, it's much easier said than done. It's one thing to see what is happening in the Russia-Ukraine war or Armenia-Azerbaijan war, etc., and another thing to imagine it in the Indian defense ecosystem. Do you think my reading is right? I mean, it's fairly complex.
No, see, that's the thing with defense and security and strategy and subject like that. Everybody has an opinion, and they all could be right or they
Yeah.
all could be wrong.
Okay.
We need an effort at national level,
Yeah.
something like a national security strategy, our North Star, that aligns or that forces or compels all services to re-tailor their doctrines towards achievement of national security objective.
Yeah.
And from that doctrine should flow our equipment, flow our training philosophies, from flow our tactical and operational deployment. So
Right.
if we have something like a North Star, which I recommend should be a national security strategy, then we can kind of align all these efforts. There are various ways to tackle security. As you said, we can decide not to fight, or we can decide to go aggressive and fight. So our security strategy should tell us that what is China, a friend, a competitor,
A
or we
rival.
need to go into a shooting war with them.
Yes, yes, that, yeah.
The gap with China is wide and it is widening.
More, yes.
What I'm trying to say is, militarily, there is no way we can defeat China in next about 3-4 decades. We will have to manage China through other means,
As well.
through diplomacy and through alliances as well. And this is my opinion that India and China are both young countries, less than 100 years old. They are old nation states and very old civilization. Our dispute with China is not civilizational. Our dispute with China relates to a border that is ill defined, and both the sides have different versions of that border.
Thanks to the British.
Yeah, if we can come to some kind of middle ground, and we have shown inclination on our part to, make concessions. We've seen it after the Doklam crisis. So if we can find a middle ground and we can kind of settle these borders, then one of our major national security concerns will be addressed.
That's right. I also was very intrigued by this thing that you said earlier when we were having discussion earlier, and you said that in the absence of a national security strategy, we remain a prisoner of the process. So I think the absence of a national security strategy has should be a concern. I think it is something which is often debated and discussed, and I think especially the internal assessment is that of course we require, but the armed forces have something, right? You mentioned.
The forces have their own doctrines,
Right.
but which is not same as NSS actually.
NSS,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Because it's interesting that I had asked the External Affairs Minister that why do we still not have like a well formulated national security strategy, and the answer that he gave me was quite strange. And he said that if we have one, but if he were to tell me that, he will have to kill me. Uh,
Yeah, well,
so I think then the key takeaway somewhere is that in the absence of a national security strategy, then we are held by ad hocism. The government of the day and everybody who's into the business, right, can just interpret India's security concerns or India's security objectives the way they want. And that is one of the reasons why we have not been able to create a synergistic response to India's strategic discourse. And one of the repercussions of that is what we see now, that the China is outpacing us and we are not able to come up with an engine in 40 years, etc., etc. But let me now connect it back to the original question that I started from. Ajay, tell us, are imports always evil?
well, imports are necessary evil.
Okay.
When the government of the day asks armed forces to go to war, it expects armed forces to win that war. Whether you win it through domestic equipment or imported equipment, that does not matter. Let me take the example of Kargil war. It was the imported Bofors gun and imported Mirage 2000 that helped us turn the tide. Let me also circle back to the LC example. We call it our domestic aircraft, but please remember, the engine is still imported. Much of its weapons and avionics are imported. The ejection seat is imported. Yes, we continue to make effort to build those things in-house, but till we reach that capacity, we need to import them. So imports are a necessary evil. That does not mean we import stuff to undermine domestic effort. No, that is not a binary choice that we make.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the key objectives of having this part two of the discussion is to address this, that we are way too used to looking at this debate in binaries. It is not a binary. Please remember, this is a continuum where time is a vector. Now, with that, of course, I will not let you go before I ask you your key recommendations. In the first part, I also urge the viewers to go and see the first episode where Group Captain Ahlawat has given some wonderful recommendations for movies to watch and for books to read. But then for this particular discussion that we had today, as the second part of that episode, could you please recommend a few books or documentaries, whatever you may deem fit?
Okay, one book I would recommend on the Tejas is the Tejas story, written by Philip Rajkumar. He was closely associated with the Tejas program. So that'll give you how the program was born and take you till around 2000, 2010.
Right.
And another documentary, or I would recommend Senate papers on how the Goldwater Nicholas Act came into being. Because for us in the services to sort our house in order, jointness is the need of the day.
Jointness.
We've had the second CDS coming to the end of the tenure, and we still not had theaterization as expected. So probably the political leadership will have to force it down the throat, and for which the Senate papers on how Goldwater-Nicholas Act in United States came into being would be a good read.
Well, thank you so much. It was wonderful having you back, and I think we are going to keep inviting him because there are so many other ideas that have flown from this discussion about, for example, you mentioned theaterization, etc. So, what I can promise is that he's going to be back with us sometime soon again. But for now, this was wonderful having you, dear viewer. There is no denying that India needs a national security strategy to build the required synergy among different stakeholders in the debate. The practitioners, the policymakers, academics, think tankers, and the media, all of these need to work in tandem if we are to achieve our goals. Ad hocism is not and cannot be a solution. We keep talking about CMO, the civil military fusion. High time we get serious on that. Second, that the Kaveri engine development is not all bad news. Even though in its current form it cannot be used for fighters. The good news is dry Kaveri engine will be used for India's indigenous unmanned combat air vehicle, or the UCAV, basically a combat drone, and we have called it Ghatak. Third, inclusion of private players, if not well edged for adding real value to our defense industry, will not build competitiveness. That is what we are seeing in the case of Israeli Hermes, or what we renamed as Drishti drones recently. Fourth, imports are not ideal, but they are a necessary evil. Right now, we cannot develop our Tejas or Kaveri engines without timely imports. What we have to pick carefully is our partners, because reliability is no longer a given as geopolitical churnings get murkier. At least for the engines, we have to make a choice between Americans, the French, and the British. And finally, we need to clear the air around transfer of technology, or TOT, because nobody will give us 100% TOT in a way we can benefit from. Even Russia has not done that. We have to carefully evaluate the co-production objective to maximize India's interests, keeping cost, time, and threats in check. To that end, simplifying the defense acquisition procedure guidelines will be immensely beneficial.